My name is Marissa. I'm 27 years old, and for most of my life, I believed nothing could shake the bond between me and my grandmother. She raised me with warmth after school when my mom worked long shifts at the hospital in Dayton, Ohio. Her kitchen always smelled like apples baking, and her laugh filled every corner of that little brick house. I thought I knew every detail of her life, every crack in the old wood floor, every wrinkle in her smile. I was wrong. It started on a quiet Tuesday evening. I had called to check on her like I often did. Her voice was steady, soft, telling me she felt fine, telling me not to worry. We said our goodbyes, and I waited for the click of the line disconnecting. But the click never came. Instead, I heard a rustle, the shuffle of papers, and then a man's voice. Low, firm, and completely unfamiliar. At first, I thought it was just a neighbor stopping by, but then his words sank in. He was instructing her, telling her what to say, what to sign. My chest grew tight. He spoke like someone rehearsing lines for a play, only the stage was my grandmother's life. Then came the sound of a paper tearing and her voice trembling. But this isn't what I agreed to. In that instant, the air left my lungs. My body froze in the chair. This wasn't just a harmless mix-up. This was something darker. The man spoke again, calm, but with steel under his words. Don't think too hard. Just sign. No one has to know. My fingers gripped the phone so hard my knuckles burned. I wanted to scream, to rush over, to demand answers. But instead I sat there, paralyzed, listening as the man mentioned her house. Her only home. The one my grandfather built his life around. The one paid off since the 70s. He used words that pierced through me. Transfer and trustee. My grandmother had no idea I was still on the line. She had no idea her granddaughter was listening to her legacy being stolen in real time. My heart raced, torn between disbelief and rage. Could this be happening? Could someone really corner an 80-year-old woman in her own living room, using documents as weapons? I thought about the pies she baked for me, the prayers she whispered when I was sick, the sacrifices she made so our family had stability. And now here was a stranger, stripping it all away with the stroke of a pen. I knew I couldn't hang up. I knew if I did, I would lose the only proof that this nightmare was real. So I stayed. Every sound grew sharper. The creak of her chair, the scratch of a pen across paper, her nervous sighs. And then his voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. If you sign this now, everything will be simple. No courts, no questions. It will all be clean. I pressed the phone against my ear so hard it hurt. My pulse pounded like a drum inside my head. Something inside me whispered that this moment would change everything. I didn't know how, but I felt it deep in my bones. The man coughed, then added, "We can't waste time. Sign it before anyone finds out." And right there, I realized what I had stumbled into. This wasn't kindness. This wasn't guidance. It was theft dressed up in polite words. It was erasure, happening while the world thought she was safe. I wanted to believe someone would step in, that the universe would slam the brakes on this cruelty. But I knew better. If I didn't move, if I didn't act, her entire life's work would vanish into someone else's pocket. That was the night my life took a turn I never expected. That was the night I stepped into a fight I never asked for, a fight that would demand every ounce of courage I had left. And it all started with a call that should have ended, but didn't. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch staring at the dark screen of my phone, replaying every second of that call in my mind. The sound of paper ripping echoed in my ears long after the line finally went silent. My stomach twisted, and no matter how many deep breaths I took, I couldn't shake the chill crawling up my spine. In the quiet of my apartment, even the smallest noises felt amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, the faint buzz of streetlights outside. Every sound reminded me of how powerless I had felt, listening to my grandmother being cornered in her own living room. I kept trying to convince myself it might not be what it seemed. Maybe it was just harmless paperwork. Maybe the man really was helping her. But then her words replayed in my head. This isn't what I agreed to. That tremble in her voice wasn't confusion. It was fear. I poured myself a glass of water, but my hands shook so much I nearly spilled it. I thought about calling her back, asking who that man was. But what if he answered instead? What if he realized I had overheard everything? The thought of losing her house terrified me. That home wasn't just walls and bricks, it was history. Every holiday, every family fight, every reconciliation happened under that roof. Losing it meant losing her story, our story. As the night stretched on, dread turned into determination. I opened my laptop and started searching property laws in Montgomery County. Most of it read like a foreign language, filled with terms and codes I couldn't fully understand. But I kept scrolling, clicking, digging. Hours later, when my eyes were burning, I stumbled across something that made me stop. A phrase in plain text: deed transfer fraud. My heart hammered as I read it. It wasn't rare. It wasn't new. It happened across Ohio, across the country. And it often happened to people like my grandmother, seniors alone, trusting, targeted. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. This wasn't just a bad dream. This was real. And I was the only witness. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. But just as I started to drift, I heard the man's words again, crawling back through my mind. Sign it now, before anyone finds out. I jolted awake, covered in sweat. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't going away. The next morning, I drove straight to my grandmother's house in Dayton. The streets I had walked since childhood felt strangely unfamiliar, almost hostile. The maple trees swayed gently, but instead of comfort, they seemed to lean in with secrets they weren't willing to share. When I pulled into the driveway, memories flooded me. I saw myself at 6 years old, running barefoot across the lawn, a slice of her peach pie in my hand. I remember the squeak of the old screen door and the way my grandfather's rocking chair creaked on the porch. That house had been our anchor through every storm. But stepping inside now, I felt unease. The air smelled faintly of ink and coffee, not cinnamon and sugar. My grandmother greeted me with her usual hug, but her eyes looked tired. She asked why I came so early, and I just shrugged, saying I wanted to check in. As we sat in the kitchen, my gaze wandered to a neat stack of envelopes on the counter. Mail from the bank. Mail from an office downtown. My chest tightened. I asked casually if she'd been signing a lot of papers lately. She smiled nervously and said, "Oh, nothing important. Just things to make life easier." Then she changed the subject to the weather. But I couldn't ignore the shift. My grandma, who used to tell me every detail of her day, now dodged my questions. I walked to the living room while she made tea. That's when I noticed a business card on the side table. The name was bold, black, confident. Thomas Callahan. My stomach dropped. I slipped the card into my pocket before she returned. She placed the teacup in front of me and smiled again, but it didn't reach her eyes. Something had already changed between us. And deep down, I feared it was just the beginning. I sat in my car with the business card in my hand, staring at the name. Thomas Callahan. I had never heard of him before last night, yet here he was, connected to my grandmother's life. I pulled out my phone and searched. Within seconds, articles popped up. Real estate agent, consultant, philanthropist. Pictures of him shaking hands with city officials, smiling with his perfect suit, his hair neat, his posture confident. To the world, he was polished, successful, trustworthy. But I knew the voice I heard. Smooth, commanding, the same one that told my grandmother to sign papers in secrecy. I dug deeper. His name appeared on board lists, charity dinners, and property sales across Montgomery County. He wasn't just anyone, he was influential. He knew how to make himself look good, how to wrap deceit in charm. I gripped the steering wheel. How many other families had fallen for his act? How many homes had quietly shifted into his hands without anyone noticing until it was too late? My mind raced back to my grandmother's nervous smile, her deflections, her exhaustion. She trusted him. That was his power, appearing safe enough to let the papers slide across the table without suspicion. I whispered his name like a curse. Thomas Callahan. I needed proof. I drove to the county records office. The building was plain, with beige walls and tired fluorescent lights. The clerk barely looked up when I asked for property records under my grandmother's name. I signed the request form with shaking hands. Minutes later, a folder was slid across the counter. Inside were copies of recent filings. I scanned quickly until one line froze me. Trust adjustment, pending. Next to it, the name Thomas Callahan. My stomach turned. This wasn't just in discussion. It was already in motion. I closed the folder and walked out into the sunlight, but it didn't feel warm anymore. And for the first time, I realized how dangerous silence could be. I sat in my apartment that night with a folder spread across the table. My heart pounded as I flipped through the pages. Words blurred together. Deed, trustee, adjustment. The language was crafted to confuse, to hide the sharp edges behind polite legal terms. I called my cousin in Cincinnati, hoping for support, but she brushed it off. You're overreacting. Grandma probably just wants help managing her things. Don't stress yourself. I hung up, staring at the phone in disbelief. No one else saw what I saw. No one else had heard that voice. Alone, I opened my laptop again. I typed Callahan's name and scrolled until my eyes ached. And then I found it. A forum post about elder exploitation cases in Ohio. The post mentioned a man with the same last name tied to questionable transfers. It wasn't evidence, but it was a pattern. My chest tightened. If he had done this before, he could do it again. As I leaned back, exhausted, an email alert flashed on my screen. I clicked it and my blood ran cold. Attached was a draft of a document titled, Transfer of Deed. The message was brief. No greeting, no explanation. Just one chilling line. Please review before filing. My vision blurred. I scrolled through the attachment, seeing my grandmother's name, her address, the house that held generations of memories. And then my eyes caught the signature line. Her name was already typed there.
Not signed. Typed.
The room spun around me. This wasn't a warning. This was a countdown. The email with the draft deed transfer burned in my mind like a brand. I printed it out, every page shaking in my hand, and stared at the lines that seemed so ordinary on the surface, but hid something deadly beneath.
Dates.
File names. The metadata whispered clues, and I leaned in closer. That's when I saw it. The document was created months before my grandmother ever mentioned getting help with her property. The timeline didn't make sense. It was as if someone had planned this months in advance, long before she even signed anything. My heart raced as I highlighted the dates. They were trying to make it look fresh, but the history in the digital file told the real story. I couldn't do this alone. I drove to the library the next morning. The smell of old books wrapped around me as I walked up to the counter. The librarian, a woman with kind eyes and a calm smile, noticed the stress etched on my face. I whispered my request, asking for help with property records and deed transfers. She didn't ask questions, just pulled out a guide and showed me how to search. Hours passed as I clicked through online records. And then it happened. My grandmother's address appeared with a note, pending trust adjustment. My stomach clenched. This wasn't speculation anymore. It was already filed, already moving forward. I copied every detail, page by page, into a folder I could carry like armor. Walking out of that library, the sky looked gray even though the sun was shining. My grandmother's home, the place that had carried our family stories, was dangling on the edge of being stolen. Back in my car, I gripped the steering wheel and whispered to myself, "Not on my watch." But even as I spoke the words, my phone buzzed. A text message flashed across the screen, sent from an unknown number. Just 4 words. "You're too late already." I stared at the text until my eyes blurred. My chest tightened with a mix of fear and fury. Who knew I was digging? Who was watching me? I needed help, someone who understood the fine print better than I did. That's when I remembered Naomi, an old friend I met during college. She had become a paralegal after losing her aunt to a financial scam eerily similar to this one. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but desperation pushed me to call. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice carried both surprise and concern. I didn't waste time. I spilled everything, The phone call, the papers, the pending status, the text. Silence filled the line for a moment. Then she said, "Meet me tomorrow. Don't show anyone else what you found. Bring the documents." The next day, I met her in a small coffee shop near downtown. She looked sharper than I remembered, her eyes alert, scanning the room before she sat down. I handed her the folder. She flipped through the pages, her brow furrowing deeper with every sheet. "This is classic," she muttered. "Predatory paperwork. He's making her think it's just for convenience, but once it's filed, he controls everything. You need to stop this before it's finalized." Her words sent chills through me. I asked her what to do. She leaned closer and whispered, "We create a paper trail of our own. We collect proof. We find every inconsistency. That's how you fight someone like him. With dates, with stamps, with signatures." For the first time since this started, I felt less alone. But relief was short-lived. Naomi looked at me with a seriousness I couldn't ignore. "If he gets this through next week, your grandmother's house is gone. No court will give it back without years of battles. You don't have time." Her warning hit me like a slap. My window was closing, and just as I started to thank her, my phone buzzed again. This time the message read, "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." That night, sleep refused to come. The warning text played over and over in my head. I thought of my grandmother sitting in her recliner, probably watching late-night television, unaware that vultures circled above her. I decided to call her the next morning, hoping to get clarity. When she answered, her voice was cheerful, almost too cheerful. I asked how she was doing, if she had been signing anything important. She paused before answering. Then she said, "Thomas is helping me with the paperwork. He says it'll make everything smoother. He's been so kind." My throat tightened. She trusted him completely. I tried to explain that she didn't need to sign anything without family looking it over first. Her tone shifted. "Marissa, you worry too much.
He knows what he's doing.
You don't need to interfere." The conversation ended quickly after that. I sat on the edge of my bed, my heart heavy. I wanted to scream, to shake her into seeing what was happening. But her trust in him blinded her. Later that day, I met Naomi again. She studied the new email I had received, the draft deed with her name typed in. Her jaw tightened. "They're escalating. They want our signature on this by Friday." Her words made me dizzy. Friday. Just days away. I told Naomi about the phone call, about how my grandmother defended Callahan.
She sighed.
"That's what makes people like him so dangerous. They don't just steal with papers. They steal with charm." We sat in silence, the weight of it pressing down. Then I looked at my phone again. Another message had arrived. This one cut straight to my bones. "This isn't your fight. Walk away." I didn't walk away. The more they pushed, the more determined I became. Naomi suggested filing a temporary hold at the county clerk's office, something to freeze the process until we could gather stronger proof. It wasn't permanent, but it was a shield. The clerk's office smelled of dust and stale air. I clutched the folder to my chest as I stepped up to the counter. The clerk looked tired, uninterested, but Naomi spoke with steady confidence. "We'd like to place a hold on this property transfer." Papers slid back and forth. Stamps thudded against the desk. My heart raced with every sound. Finally, the clerk nodded. "It's filed. The adjustment is frozen for now." Relief rushed through me like water. For the first time in days, I could breathe. It wasn't over, but at least we had bought time. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at the stamped copy of the freeze. I felt like I had won a battle in a war I never wanted. I thought maybe, just maybe, we had a chance. But peace never lasts long. 2 days later, I drove to my grandmother's house. As I pulled into the driveway, I heard shouting from inside. My stomach dropped. I pushed the door open and froze. There he was, Thomas Callahan, standing in her living room, his voice sharp, his suit perfect, his presence filling the space. He slammed his hand against the table, his face twisted with anger. "Who's interfering with my documents?" My grandmother sat in her chair, trembling, looking between us. She had no idea I had just walked in. I stood in the doorway, my pulse pounding. And I knew he was talking about me. His eyes locked on mine the moment I stepped further into the room. Cold, piercing, like a predator who had finally spotted the threat. My grandmother tried to speak, but he cut her off. Do you know what kind of trouble your granddaughter is causing? She's jeopardizing everything. I clenched my fists, fighting to stay calm. She doesn't need to sign anything. Not with you. His lips curled into a smirk. You think you understand? You don't. These papers are for her protection. You're just too young to see the bigger picture. I turned to my grandmother, begging her with my eyes. But she looked torn, caught between the man who spoke with confidence and the granddaughter who spoke with desperation. Marissa, she whispered, maybe you should let him finish. The words stabbed me. My own grandmother was starting to doubt me. I felt tears pressing at the corners of my eyes, but I swallowed them down. Grandma, please. Don't let him trick you. Grandpa never wanted this. Remember what he said? The house is meant to stay in the family. For a flicker of a second, I saw hesitation cross her face. But Callahan leaned in closer to her, his voice smooth as silk. You know your granddaughter doesn't understand. This is what's best for you. The room felt like it was closing in, the walls pressing against my chest. My grandmother lowered her head, whispering, I don't know who to believe anymore. The silence that followed was unbearable. And then it hit me. There was something we hadn't looked for yet. My grandfather's old will. The one that spelled out everything about the house. I raced upstairs, ignoring Callahan's shouts behind me. In the desk drawer, under stacks of yellowed papers, I found it. The original will, the one written decades ago. And as I scanned the lines, my heart nearly stopped. The will directly contradicted everything Callahan was pushing. I held the will in my hands, the paper soft from age, but the ink still bold enough to cut through the lies. My grandfather had written it clearly. The house was to remain in the family, never transferred, never sold, always protected. My heart pounded as I read those words aloud in the quiet of the bedroom, my voice trembling but sure. Downstairs, I could hear Callahan's voice rising, demanding to know what I was doing. I tucked the will against my chest and marched down the stairs, each step heavier than the last. When I reached the bottom, his eyes narrowed at the sight of the folded document in my grip. What is that? He snapped. It's the truth, I said, laying the will on the table. My grandmother leaned forward, her hands trembling as she traced the familiar handwriting of her late husband. Tears welled in her eyes. This is what he wanted, she whispered. Callahan's mask slipped. His smile faltered, and a flicker of panic crossed his face before he quickly regained his composure. Old papers don't matter. Laws change. This doesn't stop the transfer. But I wasn't about to let him twist the narrative again. Naomi and I spent the next 2 nights compiling every document, every signature, every discrepancy. The dates didn't match. The notary stamps were off. Even the font on certain forms looked manipulated. I spread everything across my kitchen table until the surface disappeared under papers. Naomi helped me organize them into a binder thick enough to choke the lies. Each page was a bullet, each stamp a shield. I knew we couldn't rely on anger or emotion alone. We needed proof that screamed louder than his charm. On the 3rd morning, my phone rang. It was the county clerk. If you don't file stronger evidence soon, the freeze will be lifted. You have 1 week. My blood ran cold. 1 week to prove the truth. 1 week to stop him. I looked at the binder, then at the will in my hand. We had the truth, but would it be enough to be heard? The week passed like a storm, every hour heavier than the last. Naomi suggested we make the fight public. Expose him where he can't hide, she said. My hands shook at the thought, but deep down I knew she was right. A community board meeting was scheduled that Friday evening at the municipal hall. Ordinary people came to voice concerns about zoning, sidewalks, and taxes. But that night, I walked in with a binder clutched against my chest and a fire in my heart. The room smelled of old wood and coffee. Locals whispered greetings, unaware of the battle about to unfold. I signed my name to speak and waited as others voiced their issues. When my turn came, I stepped forward, my voice trembling at first, but growing stronger with each word. I laid out the evidence. The will, the mismatched dates, the typed signatures. I explained how predators use trust and paperwork to erase elders from their own lives. Murmurs filled the room, faces shifting from confusion to outrage. And then I placed the copy of the will on the projector for everyone to see. My grandmother's name, my grandfather's handwriting, his words set in ink decades ago. The truth glowed against the wall for the whole community to witness. In the back of the room, I saw him, Callahan, sitting with arms crossed, his smirk daring me to continue. When I finished, he rose calmly, smoothing his suit. His voice dripped with confidence. Don't be fooled by emotional theatrics. These are outdated papers. What I've done is perfectly legal. But the murmurs didn't die down. They grew louder. Neighbors who had known my grandmother for years shook their heads. One woman whispered, "This isn't right." Another muttered, "He's done this before." The meeting ended, but the air was different now. People were looking at him with suspicion, not admiration. And as I packed up my binder, he leaned close, his words low enough for only me to hear. "That paper won't stop what's coming." Days later, my grandmother received a letter from his lawyer. It offered a settlement. Callahan would step back quietly if she agreed to sign a non-disclosure. No lawsuits, no headlines, no noise. Just silence. I sat with her at the kitchen table as she read it, her hands trembling. "Maybe this is good," she said softly. "Maybe it ends here." But I shook my head. That's what he wants. He wants us to stay quiet so he can do this again to someone else. If we sign, we're letting him win. Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm so tired, Marissa. I just want peace." I held her hand. Peace doesn't come from silence. Peace comes from truth. That evening, I called Naomi. We met in the same coffee shop, the binder heavy between us. I told her about the settlement. She frowned, then leaned forward. "If you want real justice, you have to escalate. File a complaint with the state attorney general. Elder exploitation is a crime." The weight of her words settled deep in my chest. Filing meant stepping into a bigger storm, but staying silent meant betraying my grandmother and every other family Callahan might target. I opened my laptop, typed in the official website, and filled out the complaint form. Every keystroke felt like carving a path forward. When I clicked submit, my hands shook, but my heart felt steady. Minutes later, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. A voice on the other end whispered, "You don't know who you're dealing with." Then the line went dead. The complaint sparked something bigger than I expected. A week later, articles began appearing in the local paper. Community leader faces allegations of elder exploitation. His photo, once celebrated, now carried a shadow.
Calls poured in.
Families from other towns shared similar stories. Some had lost homes, others bank accounts. The pattern was undeniable. What started as my grandmother's fight was quickly revealed as a network of deceit. Callahan's polished mask began to crack. He skipped community events. His real estate partners distanced themselves. The whispers turned into headlines, and the headlines into investigations. Through it all, my grandmother finally began to see. She apologized in tears one afternoon, clutching my hand. "I didn't want to believe it, Marissa. He made me feel like I was safe. But you were right." Her words lifted something heavy from my chest. For weeks I had carried the weight of her doubt, but now she was on my side. Then came the subpoena. He was to face charges of elder exploitation, fraud, and document forgery. The man who had walked into our lives with polished shoes and smooth lies was finally being dragged into the light. The night before the hearing, I sat with my grandmother on the porch. The air was cool, the stars scattered like promises overhead. She leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "You saved me." I squeezed her hand.
"No, Grandma."
We saved each other. But even as the peace settled around us, I knew the fight wasn't done. The courtroom was waiting, and the truth had one more stage to claim. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and nerves. I sat beside my grandmother, our binder of evidence on the table between us. Naomi whispered encouragement, her steady presence anchoring me through the storm. When Callahan entered, he looked smaller than I remembered. His suit was perfect, but his confidence had cracks. The judge's gavel echoed, and the proceedings began. The prosecutor laid out the case. The forged documents, the manipulated signatures, the pattern across multiple families. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of his reputation. When the will was presented, my grandmother's tears flowed freely. She whispered my grandfather's name under her breath, like a prayer. Callahan tried to defend himself, his lawyer spinning words about misunderstandings and technical oversights. But the documents spoke louder than his charm ever could. When it was my turn to speak, I stood with trembling legs. I told the court about the night of the phone call, about hearing my grandmother's fear, about the pressure in that unseen room. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. I wanted the world to feel what I had felt, the outrage, the helplessness, the fire that pushed me to fight. Hours later, the judge delivered the verdict. Callahan was found guilty of elder exploitation and ordered to repay damages. He would never work in property again. My grandmother's home was safe, her name restored in full. Relief washed over me, but it wasn't just about us anymore. Families across Ohio reached out, thanking us for giving them courage. Our fight had cracked open a system of silence. Weeks later, I returned to my grandmother's house. The deed sat on the table, her name shining in gold ink where the county clerk had officially restored it. She placed my hand over it and whispered, "This is our legacy." I stepped outside into the sunlight, breathing deeper than I had in months. Justice hadn't been loud. It hadn't come with fireworks or parades. It came quietly, through persistence, through paper trails, through the refusal to look away. And as I stood there, I realized something. Quiet justice may not roar, but it has the power to change everything.